goods don't make us very happy. Goods are not central to satisfaction. What actually really makes people happy are non-material things. What makes people happy seems to be things connected with sociability. I don't mean to say by that material things have nothing to do with happiness. Poor people are not happy. They don't have access to, to clean drinking water. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to shelter. So it's not that material things are not connected to happiness. They are to some degree. But once you get past a certain level of comfort, material things simply don't provide us happiness. At the same time, there is this giant propaganda system of advertising that is, again, perpetually telling us that the way to happiness is through objects, the way to happiness is through consumption. What makes people happy are things to do with society, with connection, with personal connection, with autonomy, with relaxation. In fact, when you ask people what it is that makes them happy, goods very rarely come into it. However, the problem is that capitalism has to sell goods. The marketplace provides goods, and therefore what it did was it took the images of the life that people really want, which is a life of meaning, of connection, of sociability, of friendship, of family, of intimacy, of sexuality. Those are the images that it took, and it linked them to objects. And so advertising is both true and false at the same time. If it was simply false, it wouldn't work. But advertising is true to the extent that it reflects our real desires.
As bizarre as it may sound for people who dream of fantastic wealth as a cure for unhappiness, the same holds for the wealthy. Beyond a certain level of material comfort, deprivation is relative.
At the bottom level, sure, it's $5 million to $10 million a year. But once you've got 5 or 10 million, that doesn't seem like enough because you're associated with people who have 15 or 20. And when you get 15 or 20, then it's 50 and 100. And you wind up never feeling as if you have enough. And in fact, people really never even thought of themselves as rich, even when they were colossally rich, because of this phenomenon that psychologists call relative deprivation. They were comparing themselves not with you and me, but with each other in this little world that they'd come to inhabit.
In his book, The Status Seekers, Vance Packard uses the phrase merchants of discontent to describe a deliberate strategy by advertisers of targeting the less affluent with status symbol messages. For someone with little chance of changing their social conditions in life, consumerism offers a quick fix that allows people to feel as though they are climbing the social hierarchy, when in fact they are standing still. The strategy was particularly evident in mid-century automobile advertising. Studies found that people who lived in housing developments were more likely to park their cars outside of the garage than those who could afford more expensive homes. A typical example is this advertisement from Plymouth. It reads, "We're not wealthy, we just look it." The American way of life would be characterized by a myth which would seem to make political activism unnecessary. In the new democracy of material goods, there were an infinite number of possessions to be purchased by rich and poor alike. There was no need to change institutions because the system was already perfect. It was called the American Dream, and happiness was just one possession away.
Since 2000 to 2008, the inequality between the very rich and the rest of us, that inequality is greater than it's been throughout the 20th century. So we're back to like 1900 in terms of inequality. Everybody just can't make it. Throughout history, the rich have always argued that the poor are the authors of their own poverty. They're poor because they're stupid, they're disreputable, they're hopeless. People are poor because they are paid less than the value that they produce. You need poverty. Poverty is needed if you're going to have wealth. The only way a rich slaveholder, a Roman senator, or antebellum plantation owner in the South, the only way they can live in this fabulously luxurious mode is by having slaves who work from the crack of dawn down into the night. That's expropriation. That's creating the poverty of the slave or the serf or the worker so that the slaveholder or the lord, the feudal lord, or the plutocrat, the capitalist, can really accumulate wealth.
The idea that human happiness is connected to the immense accumulation of commodities. I think that idea is what is driving development in what we used to call the developed world, is driving development in China, is driving development in India. I think it will increasingly drive development in Africa as well. I think we're starting to see the results of what that means for the planet, when not only the 5% of the American population strives for that, but when increasingly the rest of the world also is bought into that, and you then have to provide the goods and the energy that those goods takes to produce, we're arriving at the kind of exhaustion of the physical planet. The ancient philosopher Confucius, he was asked what he would do if he were ever to rule the state. Someone said, okay, you're in charge of the state, what would you do? And he said a very interesting thing. He said he would, quote, rectify the language. And I think if he was asked that in the modern age, he would say, let me control the media. If you can control the stories, you don't need to have soldiers on the street corners to control them. You can control people in their own heads, in their own imaginations. On one hand, it's really depressing because it's like, how do you then get out of it? Because there's no way you can have control of media. There's no way you can compete with these stories that are told thousands of times a day through advertising, through programming, through newspapers, through the internet now, through video games, through all kinds of ways. At the same time, the reason I'm hopeful, the reason actually gives me some optimism is that capitalism has to do that. But unless it does that, they know that things will fall apart. So capitalism in that sense is like a house of cards. A house of cards that has to be constantly held together. We have to be told every single day what this story is. And they have to do it every day because it's unnatural. If it was natural, they wouldn't have to do it. And if they stop, they know that in fact it would fall apart. That actually is the great hope for me. Is in fact the amount of time they have to spend convincing us about the value of this society is in fact what gives me hope that that there's an alternative just below the surface, and that alternative is much more human, much more compassionate, is much more connected to concern for other people, is much more connected to concern for the planet, and that it's being held down by this incredible and relentless propaganda system.